Books. Books. Books.
Hello and welcome to Didn't Read It, the podcast that doesn't have a proper intro this week because I did not mean for this to be 2 episodes.
Whoopsie daisy.
But I am still here with my beloved coven, and we are going to cut in just a minute back to the sort of raw episode. So there's going to be a little bit of an awkward juncture, but I just wanted to take a quick second to reintroduce myself. Grace Todd, book gremlin extraordinaire, and with me this week are...
Lee.
There's a ghost!
Oh, just kidding. Just versus.
And Galen. And we are still discussing the complexities, the complications, and the interesting, usually unfilmed facets of Charles Dickens' immortal A Christmas Carol. So thanks so much for coming back for part 2. All due apologies for the slightly awkward cut, but I am going to throw you back in it. Thanks so much.
All
right.
So Scrooge notices something peeking out from underneath sexy Christmas presents, luxurious green and white fur robe. It might be a claw, for the flesh there is upon it. From the foldings of its robe, it brought 2 children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at its feet and clung upon the outside of its garment. Spirit, are they yours? Scrooge could say no more. They are man's, said the spirit, looking down upon them, and they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance. This girl is want. Beware them both. And all of their degree, but most of all beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased. Deny it, cried the spirit, stretching out its hand toward the city. Slander those who tell it ye. Admit it for your factious purposes, and make it worse, and bide the end.
That's when he gets one of his very cold lines thrown back at him. The end after that, have they no refuge or resource, cried Scrooge. Are there no prisons, said the spirit, turning on him for the last time with his own words. Are there no workhouses?
Ouch. Burn.
Sick burn.
It's interesting to me, that he's harping on ignorance, right? And he's harping not just on ignorance writ large, but I think it's part of the salvo in favor of children's education, obviously, keeping children out of the workplace and in education. But I think it's also a jab at the very specific willful ignorance that it takes to be a person like Ebenezer Scrooge, right? Kind of like we were talking about earlier, the Scroogification of Scrooge puts too much distance between us, I think, in a contemporary setting. It lets us hold the sort of Scroogishness of it all at arm's length, when that's not it, right? It's not that he's an angry, evil old man who delights to see children suffering. It's that he is a rich guy who doesn't particularly care about other people and is happily, willfully ignorant of the suffering around him.
It's a good thing that's a thing of the past.
Yes. Someone who's just like got their blinders on in their comfort zone and treats other people's hurt as an inconvenience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, the people like that are so rare these days.
Yeah.
We're really lucky to be living in a time where we all
solved it.
Yeah. Where ignorance and want are not problems.
Now my kids curled up in the fetal position below my robe.
No.
Mm-mm.
Wearing little Twitter logos on their foreheads.
You mean X?
Which brings us to the Ghost of Christmas Future. Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come.
The spooky.
Is stave like a chapter?
So I didn't read enough of it, but there are sort of academic writings about why he called them staves, which are usually a musical term.
Yeah.
Which parallels the idea of this being a Christmas carol.
Oh.
I just thought it was I assumed it was some sort of weird paper folding situation you had to do to make a book.
Upon the parchment.
No, he seems to have been trying to kind of intentionally invoke the idea of it being a Christmas carol in structure.
That makes sense.
La, la, la.
The paper I found was very interesting. Fa la la. But I did not finish reading it because I ran out of time.
How dare you?
I was too busy fa la laing my jingle bells.
Mistletoe?
Ho, ho, ho.
Want to fa la la and ghost of Christmas present, you know what I'm saying?
Decker halls,
Road.
yeah. So the ghost of Christmas future, when it comes to him, he's like scared. First of all, it's very spooky. He's scared, but he's setting aside his fear. He's like pushing through his fear to be like, okay, I know you got some lessons to teach me. I'm ready to go. So what he says is, "Ghost of the future," he exclaimed, "I fear you more than any specter I have seen. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear you company and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?" He doesn't talk to him, so he says, "Lead on," said Scrooge. "Lead on. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know." Which I wrote, "Aw," next to it, where it's like he's really taken these lessons to heart already, and he's just like, this guy is scary as fuck, but there's more for me to learn, I guess. So here we go. I'm so scared.
Also, I would really like to get this over with.
Yeah.
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 I'm tired. I'm frightened.
I have a head cold. I'm sleepy.
Growing morals hurts.
I'm just in my little nightie.
There's a draft.
Yeah, this ghost is just a lot of people being like, oh, Scrooge is dead. Anyways, on to the next thing.
The big thing that like we know that is like very obvious and that Scrooge is perhaps willfully blinding himself to is that every scene it's like, oh, here's a group of people talking about some asshole who died. And,
He's like, I wonder.
but who are they talking about? And Scrooge is like, who's that poor guy they're talking about? The ghost must be trying to teach me not to be like that guy. Got it.
I love that it took him so long to
Yeah,
pick up on
yeah.
that. He's like, oh, this poor sucker. Like, no
Yeah.
one liked him. I wonder who.
Anyway, how is this relevant to me?
For he had an expectation that the conduct of his future self would give him the clue he missed and would render the solution to these riddles easy. And I wrote next to that, he still doesn't know yet.
Yeah.
Like, he still has not figured out they're talking about him. It
So
takes a
weird that
long
these are
time.
all people that I know.
Yeah, he's like, I know these people. What are they talking about? Where am I, by the way? He keeps looking for himself. He's like, where am I? I want to see
again-
future me.
Hashtag relatable.
Yeah.
I think you're just like, not me.
Couldn't be me.
Bummer for that guy, but I'm built different.
I kept writing I wrote multiple times in the margins. Ah, buddy.
I made a note too about the pawnbroker scene. What I wrote at the top of my book was just, what's classy when you're rich and trashy when you're poor? When all three of them are sitting around, the line verbatim is, every person has a right to take care of themselves. He always did. They are behaving to the letter in a manner according with Ebenezer's ethos. It's just bad and gross because they're poor people.
This is like the laundress and everyone that has taken all of his stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, the area that the neighborhood they're in and the shop that they're in when they, took all of Scrooge's bed things, but he doesn't know it was him. They took some poor old sap's personal belongings and are now pawning them off. And it's, their dialogue with each other. And it's supposed to be this like wretched place and like so gross. And how could they talk like this? And I was just kind of like, this seems fine. They're just doing business. And the lady, the kind of main lady, keeps defending herself almost, even though no one's reproaching her. But maybe Dickens was anticipating that the audience would be like, this lady sucks. But she's just like, look, I'm just doing what I do. And he was such an asshole. And like she defends herself many times. And I'm just kind of like, girl, you do you. Like, you're fine with me. You all seem fine.
You were born to make your fortune, said Joe, and you'll certainly do it.
Yeah.
She's like, yes, I will. You know what? I will. Because so did he.
One of the things that all three of them agree upon is essentially that if he had been a better person, someone would have been there to stop them from stealing all his stuff.
Yeah.
And you're like,
Yeah.
meh.
Yeah,
True.
He was alone.
Yeah.
Fair.
He was just laying there cold. Like, they came in, there was nobody around. They started taking stuff, and his dead body was still there, but...
Probably owed you short wages. Oh, which reminds me, speaking of shorting people wages and people being horrible and people dying alone, I would like to take a moment, considering the news of the last week or so as we're recording, that, in my opinion, Dickens says that you are allowed to be stoked when a dude dies.
Yeah.
Oh.
and that there is nothing wrong with that, even a little. And I am here for it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there is a scene with the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come where Scrooge sees all of these people who have stolen all of his stuff, even though he's refusing to admit that it's him. What does he ask? Because the way he asks both times is funny.
If there is any person in this town who feels emotion caused by this man's death, show that person to me, spirit, I beseech you.
And so what happens...
Careful what you wish for.
Yep. So what happens is we see a man and a wife who owed Scrooge money, didn't have it, and were prepared to wind up homeless that very day. And he comes home, and at length the long-expected knock was heard. She hurried to the door and met her husband, a man whose face was careworn and depressed, although he was young. There was a remarkable expression in it now, a kind of serious delight of which he felt ashamed and which he struggled to repress. Is it good, she said, or bad? Bad, he answered. We are quite ruined? No, there is hope yet, Caroline. If he relents, she said, amazed, there is. Nothing is past hope if such a miracle has happened. He is past relenting, said her husband. He is dead. And this is the part that I loved so much. She was a mild and patient creature, if her face spoke truth. But she was thankful in her soul to hear it, and she said so with clasped hands. She prayed forgiveness the next moment, and was sorry, but the first was the emotion of her heart.
Yep.
And then it concludes, soften it as they would, their hearts were lighter. The children's faces, hushed and clustered round to hear what they so little understood, were brighter. And it was a happier house for this man's death. The only emotion that the ghost could show him, caused by the event, was one of pleasure. These are not bad people. These are not people we're meant to judge.
No.
And I am so tired of living in an era where anytime a war criminal dies, someone will crawl out of the woodwork to be like, it's not very classy of you to be happy when war criminals die. And I would like to say that for better or worse, the Victorian era, they were so hung up on what was and wasn't appropriate, and they had little codes of conduct for every single moment of every stupid day. And if Dicken says that I can be happy when a moneylender is dead, then I think we should believe him.
Yeah. No, that's valid.
Here, here. Here, here.
Yeah, that scene like kind of caught me a little bit because I was like, ooh, I don't remember this.
Bad fortune indeed to find so merciless a creditor in his successor. We're not going to find anybody who's worse than Scrooge.
The other thing too that got me,
Like, it would not be possible to find someone more terrible than this guy.
surely there is not another bastard in all of London.
We're definitely going to sleep with light hearts because we are not finding his equal. Marley's already dead, and he was even worse. So we're good. Also, there was a really cool part before that with the spooky. The phantom spread its dark robe before him for a moment like a wing, and withdrawing it revealed a room by daylight where a mother and her children were. I just thought that was a really cool, like,
It's a very cinematic transition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, ooh, that's neat.
Other than that, I feel like most of the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come makes it onto screen because it's Tiny Tim dying and Ebenezer's corpse. It's pretty quick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I will say what was interesting that I didn't know or didn't remember was that, you know, as Scrooge is getting more and more emotional and he's like, who is the guy that everybody's happy is dead? And it's like, oh no, it's me. And he's just really upset and he's like begging the spirit to, I don't know, help him change. And the spirit, it's heretofore been, like Jess said, the kind of Grim Reaper type that doesn't talk and has like abyss for a face and just points at things. And as Scrooge is getting more and more distressed towards the end of their time together, it starts like kind of shaking and faltering and like the hand will point to something but it'll tremble and like Scrooge grabs its hand and its hand shaked and he even called the spirit's hand like a kind hand and I'm like, oh, the ghost feels bad for him.
Yes.
So the spirit, okay, a few things that I highlighted in that area is when you know, right before the spirit show, you know, he's like, who is the guy who died? And the spirit's pointing to the grave, and the grave says Ebenezer Scrooge. And right around that time, just answer me one question. Are these the shadows of things that will be, or the shadows of things that may be only? He's desperately trying to be like, is this like definitely gonna happen? Or is it just like, it could happen?
Bargaining.
Yeah. You know, he points him to the grave, and it's like, Ebenezer Scrooge, it's you. And he's like, no. Spirit, he cried, tight clutching at its robe, hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been but for this intercourse. Why show me this if I am past all hope? For the first time, the hand appeared to shake. That question really got me, where he's like, why are you showing me this? Like, am I definitely going to do it? Or like, can I change? You know?
I can be fixed.
Yeah. And the spirit's like, sorry, you know?
Yeah. I found that surprisingly sweet.
Yeah.
I didn't notice that when I was reading it. That's interesting.
Well, because all the adaptations show it as so,
yeah.
it's nothing, you know, it's a,
Yeah.
It's like very, in Scrooged, it was very menacing.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the last thing that happens is in his agony, he caught the spectral hand. It sought to free itself, but he was strong in his entreaty and detained it. The spirit, stronger yet, repulsed him. Which
He's always grabbing at
he's
the
very
ghost.
touchy-feely with
Yeah.
the ghosts in a way that I hadn't realized necessarily. And yes, then the bedpost was his own.
Aha. And then he starts to get really giddy, and it's honestly really cute. It keeps describing him as frisk once he realizes, like, oh, I'm here, I'm in, and it's all over, and I'm alive. And he keeps frisking to different rooms and frisking around. And I was like, that's adorable.
It was such a change of pace because the whole, like, right before that with the seeing his grave and everything is when, like, they're showing the Cratchits and Tiny Tim has died. And I, like, that actually brought tears to my eyes. I was like,
Yeah.
I knew I was expecting this, but I was like, he's dead.
Because they were like trying to rally and be
Yeah.
like, well, it's good that we got the time we get. Like they were
Yeah, it was like
really
a
trying to be
sweet-
positive about it.
It was, but it's like, oh no, your child is dead.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very sad. And then it's like the next, like, what, 2 pages later, and he's like, huzzah, I'm a baby again. You're like,
Yeah.
okay, what?
One of the things that jumped out to me this time about the end is that there's the really charming giddiness, like Lee was saying, with all of the friskiness and the laughter and the ordering the prize turkey. And then it feels like it kind of runs through a little bit of a checklist or a beginning checklist for how to actually do the making amends part.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really stood out to me was that he does the whole thing that we see in most of the adaptations where he orders the prize turkey and sends it to Bob Cratchit's house. And then he goes out into the street and he sees one of the people who came and asked him to donate money to the poor. And it says, it sent a pang across his heart to think how this old gentleman would look upon him when they met. But he knew what path lay straight before him, and he took it. And he says, you know, the guy says, Mr. Scrooge, and he says, yes, that is my name, and I fear it may not be pleasant to you. Allow me to ask your pardon. Then he promises a bunch of money, but
He's like, I know I f***ed up and you probably don't want to talk to me. Will you let me say something right now?
yeah, like
Yeah.
he has to swallow his embarrassment because that is the first and most important step to becoming a better person.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
recognizes what he did before and how bad it was and acknowledges it and apologizes. And yeah, it is actually showing like true atonement.
Yeah. I think, again, one of the things that gets a little bit lost in the translation from then to now is the Victorians were so much more intense about etiquette that swallowing your own pride and begging someone's pardon is a bigger deal, especially for men.
Yeah.
Still a big deal for men. Jeez.
That is true, actually. I'm sorry. I gave men too much credit again.
Well, and then after that, he like reaches out for connection in a way that's really sweet. So he promises the money and the guy starts being like, oh, thank you so much. And he's like, don't say anything, please, retorted Scrooge. Come and see me. Will you come and see me? I will, cried the old gentleman. And it was clear he meant to do it.
Yeah.
And I was like, he was being vulnerable throughout that whole interaction.
Yeah.
Because the guy could have been like, you know, thanks for the money. But the guy was like, yeah, I'll come back. And Scrooge was like, thanks.
sure?
Yeah.
I'm not just gonna write you a check. Like, come hang out.
Yeah.
I also love that when he goes to the office to get there before Bob Cratchit and he's like, I'm gonna with this guy a little bit. I'll play a little joke on him. I'm feeling good now. Like we're gonna have a little fun with this. And he like pretends to be super pissed off because he's late when he gets there and he's like, I'm giving you a raise. It's like,
Yeah.
Like, we're doing pranks.
yeah.
I love that the first thing he does is just go and immerse himself in the streets of London at Christmas time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He went to church and walked about the streets and watched the people hurrying to and fro, and patted children on the head and questioned beggars and looked down into the kitchens of houses and up to the windows and found that everything could yield him pleasure. He had never dreamed that any walk, that anything could give him so much happiness.
Yeah. It's very sweet and lovely. And those are streets that he's walked down every day and just been in his own little bubble of hatred and misery. And
Yeah.
he's seeing his whole world that, again, he's been walking down every day with like whole new eyes. It's quite beautiful.
And the idea before that only money could give you happiness. And now, like, I underlined that sentence and found it very impactful, even though it was very simple, is that he found that everything could yield him pleasure.
Yeah.
Anything can be meaningful. Anything can have the meaning that you ascribe to it. I find that very relevant.
He's immersing himself in kind of the great broad human. I don't know. Maybe it's because we're all at a point sort of societally where we're very isolated. But it felt especially impactful to me that he doesn't go straight to his nephew's house. He doesn't go straight to Bob Cratchit's house. He just goes out into the city to just be in the press of humanity writ large. We need more of that.
Yeah.
One of the things that routinely surprises me about Victorian era and earlier Christmas media in a general sense is how little it is oriented around the nuclear family and how much more it focuses on friends, and it is nowhere near so hung up on mom and dad and Sue and Bill at home together with maybe the grandparents eating a turkey. Like,
Yeah.
Christmas was a time for public
Yeah.
activity. It was a time for visiting friends and visiting old friends and having parties and having people over. And it was like a much more extended, much more social thing.
Yeah.
And especially with where we are in sort of the current zeitgeist, the repositioning of Christmas to be so nuclear family focused is, I think, why so many people are really ambivalent about this time of year, because a lot of people's nuclear families suck ass.
Yeah, they just have different,
Or it's
difficult relationships with them.
Complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To your point, there's a part on right at the start of the book on page 5 when his nephew is talking that talks about Christmas time, and he says, Christmas time as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, the only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave and not just another race of creatures bound on other journeys.
I
Which
loved that.
sort of encapsulates, I feel like, everything that you were saying as far as it's everyone. It's all of us. We're
Yeah.
all on this spinning rock in the universe together.
And at one point, I think when he's out with the Ghost of Christmas Present and they're just going around the city, like as everyone's celebrating Christmas, I think at one point the narration is like, all these people were out going to parties and everyone's going to someone's houses. It's kind of makes you wonder who is hosting, because everyone is just going somewhere else. And I was like, that's a very good observation, Dickens.
I did like I had that underlined too. I was just like, yeah, that math ain't math. Like, who's in the house to be receiving the guests?
But yeah, I really wanted to kind of highlight the shift in emphasis from then to now. And finally, I wanted to point out one of my favorite things about this book, which is that the emphasis of the narration for the following line is accurate to the book. Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. It's in all caps in the text.
Yeah. He's like, don't worry.
Yeah, I thought that was unique to A Muppet Christmas Carol.
It is not.
No.
And the man who invented Christmas, that seemed to be relatively based pretty well in Dickens' life. But apparently someone, his friend who was investing in the publishing of it, again, not totally sure if this is historically accurate, may need a fact check, but his friend who he let read it was like, you can't publish it if the kid dies. Like, you can't make the kid die. So to me, that was like kind of a you to like his friend who was editing it for him or like reading it. It was like, you can't publish this book if the little kid dies. Like, you can't do that. It's too sad. It's a Christmas book. No,
like,
so
fine.
it kind of felt like yeah, of course I'm not gonna kill him, but I will emphasize that because it seems to be a problem with the people I've let read the rough draft of this.
Chill, dude. I didn't kill him.
Did not die.
To my knowledge, there is no proof that he originally killed off Tiny Tim and somebody stopped him. But I really like the version of that they have in that movie. And I don't know why he capitalized it, but it's very funny every time I read it, because I hear it in Gonzo's voice every time. Who did not die. To to close on sort of the Victorian masculinity angle, I really, really love the last note, which is, some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh and little heeded them. For he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good, at which some people did not have their fill of laughter in the outset. And knowing that such as these would be blind anyway, he thought it quite as well that they should wrinkle up their eyes in grins as have the malady in less attractive forms. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. And that's nice. And also, it feels in these last few pages like Dickens is anticipating the things that people tell themselves when they are asked to be better. Right? The excuses that people come up with when they are asked to change their behavior for the better. And he's kind of very quietly being like, absolutely not. No.
Yeah.
These are not good excuses.
Try again.
Do it. You sorry. Or you're going to get haunted.
I mean, who cares if people laugh at you for being kind? I feel like people are resistant to being kind because they see it as a weakness. I'm gonna think about toxic masculinity. But being kind or being patient are being perceived as being feminine traits a lot of time. And so, I don't want to do that. I gotta be hard in front of my bros. Like, when people laugh at me, it's like, what? People laugh at you. People are gonna laugh at you anyway.
Yeah,
Just
he's
do
like,
it.
they're
There's
going to laugh
reason
no
not to
matter
be.
what.
Yeah.
At least, you know what? When they're laughing, at least it's cute.
At least it's nice.
Yeah.
Because, and I don't know why he's the first name that springs to mind, but it works. Like, Andrew Tate is the kind of man who is afraid who like can't stomach the idea of being laughed at for being kind, right? He would rather hurt people than think that for even a moment he is being laughed at.
And yet, people laugh at him all the time.
Constantly.
All the time.
Because he's a real piece of
Yeah, it's not because he's funny.
Insecurity is a hell of a drug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good God.
But if there's one concluding thought that I really, really want to drive home about this book in its original text, it's that in a lot of adaptations, especially current adaptations, like stuff that's come out in the last few years, people have been pushing and pushing to kind of pathologize Scrooge or to make him a victim of trauma. So there's been an uptick in stuff where they're trying to give him this increasingly tragic backstory. And I think that positioning Scrooge as a victim of trauma in the sort of hurt people vein of things is to undermine the original point of this story in a way that is ultimately not great.
Yeah, because the original point is still very much alive, which is like middle and upper class bubble, like comfort zone bubbles and apathy.
Ignorance and want.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And yeah, hurt people, but also people who've dealt with severe trauma usually aren't clawing their way to the top of society because they're busy dealing with their trauma.
Yeah, he was just a pretty ordinary man.
Yeah.
He didn't have the happiest childhood, but well, most people in Victorian England didn't. So,
Yeah. He definitely had a lot better than most, though.
yeah.
I think it's a good, like, you start out right in the middle and you can claw your way to your top.
He's not the way he is because he's a sad sack. He's the way he is because he's the Victorian equivalent of like a grindset mindset podcast host.
Oh, God.
Who's like, I do nothing in the day that I can't say directly benefits me.
Must be nice. I like when Lee goes feral.
You know, and like that's the whole thing is he thinks he's fine at the beginning of the book. He thinks he's happy. He thinks he's doing everything right. He's like waking up every day being like, I am the best at being the best.
Yeah.
And I am killing it.
Rise and grind, baby.
Bopping down the street being like, I can't wait to emotionally abuse Bob Cratchit today. This is going to be such a good day.
I was listening to another podcast recently, a movie rewatch podcast, and they were talking about the movie Click with Adam Sandler. Well, and they were talking about how it's a Christmas Carol story, which I thought was very interesting. But he's one of those guys who's like trying to make it as a partner in his architecture firm or whatever. And he gets that, you know, it's the remote that you can fast forward through life and blah, blah, blah. And he's fast forwarding through all these things so he could go like work harder and do all this stuff. And then he ends up dying miserably. And then it all ends up being a whole, you know, spoiler, but it ends up being just like kind of like
I haven't
this.
seen it.
But it was very interesting. But he was very much that like grindset mindset. I got to make it to the top of my firm and blah, 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 blah. And of course, it's, Christopher Walken is all three of the ghosts, basically. I just thought that was a very interesting, like, oh yeah, this is a Christmas Carol. It's not as overt as it's not like a Christmas Carol adaptation. It is just an Adam Sandler movie. An ordinary guy who's trying to make it farther in my life and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden I have missed out on everything good that could be happening.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I feel like secretly a lot of the best Christmas Carol adaptations are not Christmas Carol adaptations.
There have
What are
obviously...
what are some of the less obvious ones?
The only one I thought of was The Grinch.
The Grinch is 100%.
The Grinch is a great one.
Yeah.
There was a Christmas episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer where Angel is basically the Scrooge character, in case anyone was wondering.
That makes sense.
I was. Thank you.
Well, and now that we've run through all of the things in the book that don't usually make it onto screen, what are our favorite adaptations? Which ones have we seen that we think are doing a good job? Which ones have we seen that we think are doing a bad job?
I mean, we all obviously, like, Muppet Christmas Carol is the epitome of perfect
Yes.
adaptations. It's so well done.
Well, I should hope so. I mean, Dickens did bother to claw his way out of hell, travel through time, and possess a Muppet. So, like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I can't remember if we talked about this briefly at the beginning of recording or you and I talked about this earlier today, but the book is so funny. And as I was rereading it this time around, I always think of the Muppet Christmas Carol as being kind of a goofy version of it. But no, it's amazingly
It's
on
like, yeah.
point with the tone of the whole book. It's so freaking good. I love it. I also rewatched Scrooge in anticipation of this, which I hadn't seen in a few years, and it's so good. It's obviously not like a one-to-one adaptation of the story. He's the TV network guy, and they're putting on A Christmas Carol on his television network as a live version, and he goes through all of it. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
It's so good.
It's exactly what you think a 1980s executive, just drizzled in cocaine adaptation featuring Bill Murray and his amazing hair would
Oh,
be.
his
There's
hair.
some
Like an era
problematic stuff
Scrooge.
in there, but I rewatched it and I realized as a kid there were a couple years where I couldn't watch Muppet Christmas Carol because at some point I had snuck and watched Scrooged on TV. I was born in 85, so do the math. So that Scrooge came out in 88. So at some point I saw that on TV as a small child, and the Ghost of Christmas Future in Scrooged is even scarier than the Muppet one, which is pretty
so
scary.
spooky.
So I wouldn't watch the end of Muppet Christmas Carol because I had conflated the two in my head, and it wasn't until a couple of years later as a kid I was like, oh, this isn't that scary. And a few years ago when I watched Scrooged, I was like, oh, this is what I was remembering.
There's a scene where he's-
This is because it does have Muppet, or it does
Yeah.
have
it has
inside of
Muppet-esque
it.
qualities,
Yeah. Well, that scene where he's, watching whatever production, he's got his bunch of TV screens and he's got his back to it and it's showing their version of the Christmas Carol that's playing. And it's like 9 TV screens and the skeleton Grim Reaper, Ghost of Christmas Yet to Be, is coming up on the corner television and he starts overtaking, comes out of the screens behind him. And then Bobcat Goldthwait comes in and disrupts the whole thing. And it's a whole, legitimately actually very spooky.
My first memory of ever watching a movie is being scared of the Ghost of Christmas Future in a Muppet Christmas Carol as a really little kid.
The Ghost of Christmas Future is just always terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah. I stumbled on a remarkably accurate Patrick Stewart adaptation from
I tried to
1999.
watch
I've
that, but it was
seen the-
behind a paywall.
A of all, weird blast from the past. It is a Hallmark production.
I didn't realize it was Hallmark. I remember watching that, but
It is a Hallmark and TNT co-production. Back when Hallmark made stuff that had budgets. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Yeah.
It was remarkably accurate. They took a bunch of the narration by Dickens and reworked it into the dialogue
Oh, cool.
so that they worked in the coffin nail joke and they worked in some of the more important bits of context from down the line. It is very, very accurate if you can get past the sort of 1999 Vaseline lens thing.
It absolutely has Vaseline lens. Yeah.
The only thing I will say is that the Ghost of Christmas Past is
Not sexy enough. Oh, wait, no, that's not the sexy one.
Well, hey, depends on what you're into. I don't know.
Sorry.
the Ghost of Christmas Past
Cut
is
that.
disorienting. He is wearing white pancake makeup, and somebody on that set should have had more sense and style.
I also have a hard time. I do remember watching that version when I was younger. I grew up hardcore on Star Trek, hardcore on TNG. I have seen probably every episode of that show, and I've rewatched it multiple times in my adulthood. I love it. And as amazing an actor as Patrick Stewart is, it was so hard to watch him as Scrooge without thinking of Jean-Luc Picard. And it's a very, and it's like, it really took me out of it a little bit because I was like, he would never.
It's just, Galen, it's just a holodeck adventure.
It is a holodeck experience.
It's just a holodeck adventure, yeah. Also, I will say, if anybody is like, oh, I'm very curious, because it is 1999, they just inexplicably threw a fat joke right in the middle of it during the Fezziwig party.
Yeah.
They like threw in this dumb thing where they're just like, I'm on a diet. And I was like, no, don't.
Oh my God.
Scrooge also does not.
No, Scrooge definitely has some very questionable stuff in there.
They just
for sure.
really needed to make sure that you knew it was 1985 and 1999 respectively.
They are both very much products of their time.
There's a new animated one that came out a couple of years ago.
Interesting.
That seems fine if you're into animated musicals, but did the thing where they were laying it on, they like gave him a dog, and I was like, that's cute. But then they started layering on a bunch of stuff about how his sister died on Christmas Eve and he hates Christmas because his sister, and I was like, no.
Yeah.
Laying it on too thick. He can just be the person he is.
Just be an asshole.
He can just be an asshole.
Yeah.
You know? Even for children, maybe especially for children.
Yeah. Subtlety is allowed sometimes.
Yeah. Any other adaptations we want to point out? Highlight?
You kind of mentioned mine earlier, which was just 90% of Hallmark movies.
It's true.
Like the big city woman who comes back to her small town home for Christmas and is reminded of where she came from and falls in love with the sweet hometown boy and has to be taken down a notch. She's Scrooge, and she doesn't have time for Christmas anymore, but she has to come home for some reason and open a bakery or build a barn or something.
And she always has one foundational Christmas-related trauma that he fixes for her.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And then they get straight married.
He usually has a horse.
They get straight white married.
Yeah.
There is a version that I have not seen that I just kind of stumbled across when I was doing some Googling that I need to go find. I just ran out of time to watch it, but it's called Miss Scrooge, starring Cecily Tyson. And I really want to go check that out. And her name is like, I think they named her, I think it was like Ebenita Scrooge or something, but it's just like a slightly feminized version of the name. And that was from like 91 or something. So I'm sure it's
great,
like fantastically done. Cecily Tyson is rad, and I would really like to see her playing a Scrooge character. Yeah.
I really liked, it's not a, direct one-to-one, but close enough. I really liked The Man Who Invented Christmas.
I love
because
that movie
does
so much.
tie in. I just watched this one the other day because I love how it tied in the biographical stuff and sort of his imaginings, and it got kind of a good feeling of, obviously they were taking like the direct narration from it, and who's to say exactly if all of these things, if that's how that happened in Charles Dickens' mind, but I like the kind of overlay of his life and the creative inspiration flowing from it, and it put it in an interesting context that didn't do a disservice to the text. That in and of itself put the book in a more political context where I was just like, as a kid he was actually working in one. Ooh, that's rough. It put the trauma on Dickens more instead of trying to retrofit trauma onto Ebenezer.
Yeah.
I like the FX version too, but I understand that the shortcomings in like what we talked about before, giving Scrooge a past trauma that he has to work through instead of all of the stuff that we talked about before.
Is that the one with Guy Pearce?
Yes. Which I really like as a standalone. I like the fact that it gives women more agency. I liked that it sort of played with the ghosts. It filled out backstory for Marley, and they had to fill out stuff because it's 6 hours long and the book is a short story.
Yeah.
So they had to add more to it, but I completely understand it not being a very faithful adaptation of the book.
Yeah. The Man Who Invented Christmas, I love. It's so sweet. It's so charming. And also, I think it does a really good job, specifically with like all this stuff we're talking about, of being like, I, Charles Dickens, have some trauma from my childhood, and all the characters around him being like, that's cool, but it's your responsibility to like work on that and like, come on, we're gonna grow together, like let's go. Like, that doesn't excuse you from being a piece of shit.
I'm gonna have to go check that out. I think that one came out like maybe 2 years ago, right?
Recent.
Yeah.
Like it's
last
in the
couple of
in the
years.
last few. I tried to watch it, and this is absolutely not an indictment of this film, but I fell asleep because I just do that through like 75% of the movies that I attempt
Because
to
you hate
watch.
Christmas.
This is a thing I know about you.
Yes, I hate Christmas.
You hate festiveness, and also you love to sleep through films.
I do love to sleep through films. It's how I watch most movies, in fact. So I'm going to have to go give that one another shot.
2017.
Okay. Oh, that's actually, I thought it was more recent than that.
There's also one more adaptation. I didn't finish all of it. It's just A Christmas Carol. It's 2021, but it's framed as a Victorian's children toy theater performance. And the grandmother who's watching the kids with their little play set move around the figurines. The kids perform Christmas Carol every year, little Victorian kids with their toys in a little Victorian dollhouse. And the grandmother narrates it, but then it turns into a ballet where actors are saying the lines of the characters. It's all as written from the book, and the grandmother is doing the narration part on top. So the ballet dancers are not actually like mouthing the words, they're just doing the expression in their faces, and everything is a ballet. And so it kind of has a Nutcracker feel to it.
That sounds wonderful.
Interesting.
Scrooge doesn't do a lot of dancing, at least not till the end, but like it's very beautiful. The cinematography is really nice. That was kind of an interesting interpretation and very faithful to the book because it's literally just the text.
Yeah.
You can
2021.
cut this statement out if you need to, but I want to get really high and watch that. That sounds
Yeah.
delightful.
It's really nice.
I couldn't really think of a good place to throw this observation in, but as I was making notes today and rereading little snippets of text, I realized that the contemporary author that I think most reminds me of Dickens is Tom Robbins.
Yeah, I could see that.
That style of prose where it's just constant little narrative asides and jokes and observations to the
Yeah.
point where it's almost overwhelming, but it's very funny and very engaging and very conversational.
Yeah.
That's probably the most contemporary author I can think of who has that very particular style of narration, which we don't see much
Really
anymore.
like takes joy in the language and in telling the story and in
Yeah. Well,
you
and
know.
overt narrators have fallen out of style too. That's not really a thing we do as much.
I haven't read a lot of Salman Rushdie, but what I have read is similar to that, which it's just like this joyous explosion of language and just almost overwhelming, but very entertaining and like quick as well.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was thinking as I was reading this, like, I kind of love a narrator. Give me a narrator. Bring narrators back. I want more.
It's fun. It's just a fun device to use.
Yeah.
For Christmas, you would like a narrator.
Yeah.
All I want for Christmas is a narrator.
Do we want to talk about how Dickens was a boy at all or no?
I mean, we can. We're probably going to wind up talking about books of his that are not A Christmas Carol at some point.
Okay.
Because when he wrote this, he was a younger married man with a bunch of kids who was very excited about his wife and his kids, as far as I can tell. And the boyiness came later. The Dickens of A Christmas Carol overall seemed like more or less a sweetie pie.
Yeah.
The weird shit came later after he got rich and famous, as it so often does.
Hey,
Yeah.
So we'll give him a hard time when we do some of his other books.
I'm just being salacious. Charles Dick.
Kins.
Hey. Dickens.
Dickens. Merry Christmas.
Do we think we covered?
Covered the carol. I didn't
Covered it like a nice blanket of snow over a New England farm town on Christmas morning.
I was going to say on a filthy London street.
That too. Big piles
Yeah.
of horse and pollution and the fresh baked bread.
Well, babes, both babes here with me now, and all you babes out there. I'm not going to say Merry Christmas because I don't celebrate it, but I am going to say that I hope everyone out there is having a cozy, festive time of year. Extra special shout out to my beloveds in the service industry. I know that this is a time when everyone is constantly bragging about all the time off that they get, and you are being worked half to death. Woo! But I hope that you are being tipped generously. I hope that the restaurant Christmas party you have in January is a blast.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope that whatever your relationship with your family, with your community, with your friends, that at some point this year you get to feel safe and warm and loved. And from all of us here at Didn't Read It, have a warm and cozy solstice.
Yeah.
And if I don't see you before then, have a happy new year.
Yay.
I love you all very much.
I love you too.
Thank you for being here with me.
Thank you for having me again.
Thank you.
Always fun. Love you guys.
And as always, if you can, this week, this month, this pay period, consider supporting a living author because they could sure use the love. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Didn't Read It was created, written, and edited by me, Grace Todd. Kaylee Hughes is our publicist and producer. You can follow the podcast on Twitter or Instagram at didn'treaditpod, or reach us via email at didn'treaditpod@gmail.com. For source notes and further reading, as well as a list of all existing episodes, please visit our website at didn'treaditpod.com. We are recorded in Richmond, Virginia, with special thanks to Black Iris Social Club and Pesca Trio Publishing. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a review or rating on your preferred podcasting platform, or just tell a friend. If you did not enjoy today's episode, we are currently accepting applications for a full-time nemesis. Our intro music is Books, written, performed, and recorded by William Albritton.